All right, guys, so which came first, the chicken or the egg? But first of all, have you guys ever even seen a wild chicken? Or for that matter, a wild cow? Where the heck did cows come from? Today we're going to learn about what's happening with meat production, how we make it, the problems, and what the trends are globally. So first of all, why do humans even consume meat? I know we think Stone Age people were hunter gatherers, but really the more the emphasis was on the gatherer rather than the meat. Our ancestors were really plant based. However, when we started eating meat, they contained some critical nutrients, including B12 and a special form of iron that plants do not have. And those vitamins were that critical nutrition was really critical in us being able to expand our brain capacity. So how do we produce meat? When we got the modern cow from breeding oxen over hundreds of years, and pigs came from boars, and chicken came from wild fowl in the jungle. So from selectively breeding the animals that had the desired traits from each generation and domesticating them from the wild into being trained to be farm animals, we have the modern day cow, chicken, and pig. Now, usually we do free range farming. Half of the world, half of animal production is free range, where you have a plot of land and they roam around and eat. But there's one problem with it. Environmentally, what can happen is overgrazing. And that's when the cow or the horse or the sheep eats too much plant and you see these dead spots. And that's a problem because if you eat too much of the plant, it's not going to grow back. Plants mean there's no roots, which means there's nothing to hold the water into the soil, which means the soil gets dry and blows away. And when you have no soil, you can't grow anything. Land that can't be used for farming, something that's become so dry. Tell me, what is a really, really dry place with no water? It's a desert. And that's what's happening all over the world. Over thousands of years, we have been using animals, we've been rearing them through agriculture, but they're overgrazing so many parts of the world that a lot of our farmland is actually turning into deserts. Now, the alternative to free range, which is you could only have a certain amount of animals on the land, otherwise you run the risk of overgrazing and destroying your pasture. The alternative is concentrated animal feeding operations, or from henceforth I'll refer to as CAFOs. Sometimes I call them feedlots, sometimes it's called factory farming, where you cram in animals into an enclosed space, as many as possible, and instead of having them feed on grass, you're actually feeding them through a tube, and you're feeding them corn, like a corn mixture mixed with all these nutrients and sometimes growth hormones, whatever they need to grow. Now, the advantage is that it is cheaper to grow animals in this way because you can fit hundreds more animals. And also it's faster with the growth hormone. You can have a chicken ready to slaughter in just 2 months. Why wouldn't you do that? So because, and it's kind of, well, of course there's going to be problems, which we'll talk about, but because it was cheaper and faster, the CAFOs really took hold in about the 1950s, 1960s. That's also the time when you see McDonald's rising up and a whole bunch of fast food places rising up because now we have this cheap meat. And what happened was we actually increased our meat production and increased our meat consumption by 4 times globally between 1960 and 2018. In that same time frame, our world population only doubled. So that means on average, humans ate twice more meat today than they did in 1960s. There's really no reason for that. I mean, I'm a contributing factor. We eat, and we'll talk about it later, but yeah, we are eating a lot more meat than we used to, and maybe there's not a need to. So The bad things about things like CAFOs is you have a lot of animals close together, which means disease can pass easily from animal to animal. They're not social distancing, right? So this is such a big problem that 70% of antibiotics in the US are actually administered directly to farm animals. We've had things like mad cow disease, swine flu, E. coli outbreaks that come from animal manure drifting to nearby like lettuce farms, and then people are eating the raw lettuce and it's contaminated. So it's a huge problem. The second problem is you actually have a big decrease in available land for farming because a lot of farmland, 70% of farmland, is actually used not to grow food, but to grow food for the food. Used to grow corn to feed cows, which cows, if you recall back in the day, they usually eat grass, but now we have to crate them in a building. We can't give them grass. Corn is cheaper to grow and more calorie filling, so we've stuffed the cow with the corn. Here you can see how we actually use land in the US. And the biggest amount of land we use in the US is used for cows. And growing corn for cows or growing corn to feed cows outside of the US. Here, this is what we actually, how much land we use to grow food that we actually eat. So to produce meat, especially beef and lamb are the highest resource intensive meats, which makes sense. I don't know, lamb is really delicious. So to make only 1 pound of beef, it takes 7 pounds of corn, which is a huge problem because the less corn available on the market, because it's going to the south, which means there's less food for other people, as well as the price of corn goes up. And that's a big problem in developing countries where they're not really eating as much meat as they are relying on more grains. So you're actually causing food shortages by using this corn for cows, where people in other countries, they sometimes, there are corn shortages and there's famine because so much corn is used for cows. Also, you have to think about all the water you're using for the cow, but also to grow the food to feed the cow. So 52 gallons of water goes in that. That's actually that's a big number, 52. I've heard hundreds, I've heard thousands. The land. So each cow, to grow the food, to feed the cow, you need some land, and also fossil fuels. You're burning gasoline to operate the machinery, releasing carbon dioxide, which we know causes climate change. Also, cows, they emit methane, natural gas, which actually traps 20 times more heat than carbon dioxide. So the fact that we have so many cows on Earth is actually directly contributing to climate change, their very existence. Lastly, a lesser known greenhouse gas is nitrous oxide, which was released from the production of commercial fertilizer. So we're using so much fertilizer to grow corn in places where it shouldn't be grown to feed cows. Cows are really a big factor in climate change on 3 different levels, 3 different gases: carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane, which they directly emit because they're cows. And methane is released from when you're digesting, and cows have that stomach system where they're just constantly digesting and just release tons of methane. If you want to learn more about cows, you can watch Cowspiracy on Netflix. Okay, so here's a problem with our diet. Here's honestly the problem with my diet. If everyone ate like an American, if everyone ate like me, we would not have enough land on Earth to feed everybody, because it takes so much farmland to grow the food needed to feed animals. If you're eating meat more than once a day, it's not sustainable. That's crazy, right? That's crazy. Okay. But the reason why we're not completely in trouble right now is because, well, hunger is a real thing. So we are in trouble. But these countries in blue, Southeast Asia, large parts of Africa, and I think that's Peru, I want to say that's Peru, are eating more plant-based diets. They're not really eating that much meat. Maybe meat is more of a luxury once a week or once for special occasions. But the problem is people are moving to cities all over the world. When people move to cities, their income level goes up. And when their income level goes up, what do they want to buy? Meat, because meat, our bodies know that meat is a nutritious, it's a source of great nutrition. That's why our body prefers it over plants. So what's going to happen is all these countries, Southeast Asia, South America, they've been eating grains, they've been wanting to change their diet, and over time, by 2025, the meat consumption is going to double in those countries, which means globally, our meat production is going to double again. So it's going to increase meat production 800% from the 1960s, which means just more of all these problems. Less water, less land, more greenhouse gases, more climate change. So how do we produce meat in a sustainable way? Well, in Netflix Explained and Meathooked, if you watched those before, they proposed, which you've heard of, plant-based meat alternatives like the Beyond Burger Impossible Burger. Another one that they're thinking about is lab-grown meat, where it's basically indistinguishable. You're just taking the meat cells that you normally would eat from the chicken or the cow and you grow it in the lab, which is awesome because it uses less land and water and greenhouse gas emissions and energy. So you're solving all those problems, but still providing people with actual meat, flesh. It's not an alternative, it's real meat. But the problem is, would you eat it? Most people say no, or I don't know. And even me, where I would fall is unsure. I mean, I know it's the same, but is it really the same? It's just like a psychological thing. So it is the same logically, but psychologically it's just ugh. So I think the path forward, and also this can go in addition to seeking meat grown alternatives or plant-based alternatives, is let's just change our diet so that we're eating a little less meat, more plants and grains, and that's going to have a huge impact. Even just taking one day where you don't eat meat, like during Lent, a lot of people don't eat meat on Fridays, or eating meat maybe just once a day can make a huge difference. And then the biggest thing you can do is to change the type of meat you eat. The biggest resource users are lamb and beef. Whereas down here, you can see chicken, fish, shrimp, not that bad. So if we shift our addiction to beef, steaks or burgers, there's no reason we should be eating burgers on a daily basis, like a fast food style. There's nothing wrong with burgers, but it's not sustainable for us to eat this every day. Not for our health, but also just not for the planet. So that's it. So here's some key understandings. I would ask you to pause the video. I'm going to make my video go away. Pause the video, take a minute to read it. So you would need to know that the two different methods we talked about, CAFOs and free range. The next key understanding here, overgrazing, how it causes the loss of plants, which eventually leads to the formation of deserts. And then lastly, the huge environmental problems with the amount of meat that we're producing. Back in the day, if we were just hunting for the animals on Earth, that's fine. But the factory farming has really placed an unnatural amount of animals on Earth, and that is directly contributing to climate change, It is using up so much water, which we're going to talk about in about 2 weeks, and it uses a lot of, just a lot of problems.